Building. Okay, guys, I am super excited to welcome our next guest to Let's Get Freaky podcast. We got Matt with us tonight. How are you, sir?
I'm really good. I'm fantastic. It's yeah, full of the summer vibes at the moment. It's been so hot, hasn't it?
Yeah, man, it's beautiful. It is beautiful. I can't complain. Uh, I've got a little bit burnt, but apart from that, it's all good.
Yeah, I mean that's the thing. It's almost impossible not to get burnt. We've had like
Yeah,
three and a half weeks without
yeah,
hardly any
man.
rain down in the south there, have we? Haven't we? It's been
No,
pretty crazy.
it's been nice, man. So I've got to say, you've
Yeah, no
probably
mistake.
got one of the coolest jobs in the world. You work at one of the best places in the world, Stonehenge.
Yeah, I'm lucky, aren't I? Yeah, I'm a lucky
Man,
man. I'm a lucky boy.
yeah,
It's a strange place to work though. It's a funny gig. And it never gets you never get bored of it. That's the weird thing about working there. Like some of my mates are like, oh, you just like check tickets and that, do you? And talk about the Stones. Well, I'll do a bit of that, but there's also it's just you've got 5,000 years of history. You
yeah,
have
man,
1.6 million visitors,
yeah.
and quite a lot of them want to have a chat about it. And it's a really rewarding job. It's wonderful. It's a
Yeah,
wonderful gig to have.
it's such a special place, and it doesn't matter who I'm talking to in the world, wherever they are in the world, they always say about Stonehenge. You know, everyone loves Stonehenge. It's such a obviously the mystery behind the place, and as you say, the history. It's something so special about it.
It's like an onion of information. That's the best way I can describe it. Because it just every time you think you understand it, another layer, another layer, and you can appreciate Stonehenge just as a place to be, just as a vibe,
Yeah,
or you can take it on so many different levels. I had the most. I'm not lying with you. This happened to me today. I was moved to tears today at work, and so was my colleague. We're both working stood very very close to Stonehenge, the closest point, and there were these drums and singing, and it was sort of like, oh, no, 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 going on. They're like, what's going on? Oh dear, we can have a protest, and everyone's getting all jumpy. And then it turns out it was this wonderful group from Mexico, who are actually they're due to open Glastonbury Festival, or they're part of the opening of the spiritual side of Glastonbury Festival, which
oh
is happening
wow,
I think that's like the 23rd of June or something like that. So, well, we now the 16th or something like that.
yeah,
And so they'd come to Stonehenge, and they were drumming and singing, and there were blessings being made, and they were from forgive me, I'm not going to remember the name of the place, but they were from a part of Mexico where there are pyramids, and
okay,
they were explaining to me and my colleague about how they were a sacred center of the earth, and they were on this mission to bring all these sacred places together and bring peace. And it was just like, wow, um, that's amazing. And they said, hold out your hand. Can you hold out your hand for me? And I was like, okay. And then they went to place seven crystals. This chap who'd introduced himself to me as, I'm not joking, the gorilla, with one L. And he was a professor from Mexico, and he placed three beautiful stones in my hand, sort of like little gems, beautiful things. And then he said, these represent Earth. This one represents the sun, and this one represents the universe. And I was like, okay, and it's really grounding. And you thought you could answer. I thought I was going to be answering questions about Stonehenge, and he's doing this to me. It's really moving. And then he placed four more stones in my hand and said, "This is north. This is south. This is east. This is west." And then he closed my hand over them, and he said, "Now you and me are brothers." And
oh
I was like,
man,
oh. And it just hit me. And I was like, wow. And he goes, "I protect these pyramids, and you protect these stones, and we are brothers together." And then he went on to,
wow,
yeah, honestly, I'm not joking, Tommy. That happened this afternoon. And every now and then, something happens at Stonehenge that just sort of makes you sit up and say hello. And it's funny because the colleague I was working with, she very very recently just lost her father, and and it was there was something very spiritual about the whole thing that was going on there. We had tears in both of our eyes from that, but
yeah,
it's such an honor. Sometimes that's my gig. I get to, sometimes it rains on me all day long, and I get cold, and nobody talks to me all day long, or I get called a funny name or something like that. That happens, but when you just get one moment, like I had this afternoon,
makes it all
it's
worth
sort
it.
of Oh man, it does. It's like recharges you. It makes you
Yeah,
think, oh, this is what it's all about. And
yeah, man.
there's some of my colleagues who've been what we playfully call hengers, or worked primarily looking after Stonehenge operations. Um, we're a pretty close knit group, and we've gone through things together. And it's funny how I don't really know how to put it, but it's the stones. They like I say, they resonate on different levels to different people, and I'm the honor of working at Stonehenge and working within Stonehenge will never be lost on me. And when my time's done working there, I'll have to accept it, but I'll always feel part of that history. And
Yeah, man.
honestly, it's a gig. Sorry I get so deep so early, but
Yeah,
honestly,
no, it's cool, man.
that's it. And I've got right next to me in a little box here those stones that were given to me by this guy from Mexico.
Oh, wow. How
And
nice is that?
it's such an honor to be part of that.
Yeah,
And for people to seek answers from you sometimes is, and you can't let them down. You mustn't.
yeah,
It's very easy at Stonehenge to be the bad tour guide, and the bad tour guide can be the 5-star rated tour guide sometimes at Stonehenge, because he tells you what you want to hear. He
yeah,
writes a good story, and
yeah.
that happens a lot. There's a guy, and I respect him very much, but there's a tour guide. He's quite famous. He's known in the trade as the Bullet Head, and that's just because he's very bold and he's quite stocky. But he's a lovely chap, and he's made up this story at Stonehenge where he stands at a particular stone and he goes, "Ladies and gentlemen, this is the kissing stone. Grab your partner and give her a kiss, and you'll be in love for a year and a day, or until the love runs out."
Oh,
And
wow.
everybody falls for it.
Yeah.
And it's a brilliant line, isn't it? It's brilliant. Oh, I'll give my missus a kiss right now. That's brilliant. Yeah,
Yeah.
okay.
Come here.
It's completely made up, but
Yeah.
do you know what I mean? It's
Yeah.
that's kind of the beauty
Yeah.
of it all, because you've got this mysticism, this folklore, this truth, and you've got facts and lots of what's the word, legend.
Yeah.
So there's
Yeah.
there's an element of truth to some of these things, and people
Yeah.
go off in all their various it's
It
so
could
cool.
be it could be the kissing stone. Who
It
knows?
could be the kissing
Yeah.
stone. There's definitely been some kissing around that stone at
Yeah,
some
for
point. I
sure,
guarantee
man.
you that.
For
Yeah.
sure. It is such a special place. As I said to you before, I went there last year, and I'd go there every day. I mean, I was just in awe of the place. And I used to go there a lot as a kid as well. We used to go down Cornwall quite a lot as a kid, so we always used to drive past the stones as well on the way down. And every time I see it, it was just amazing. You know, it's just as you say, the wonder and the legend behind it, and it fascinates me for sure.
It's one of the strange things about living in the UK and going down to the south to visit Cornwall or Devon that people might not get if they don't live in the UK, is that you kind of have to drive past Stonehenge.
Yeah,
So
yeah,
people drive down the 303 more often than not. They're caught in slow traffic, and it's become part of the journey.
yeah.
And historically, people would pull in and have a picnic and all that
That's
way
what we used
before
to do.
cars were happening. Yeah,
Yeah,
exactly. Yeah,
yeah,
exactly. And that makes perfect sense. It's like, oh, we'll stop at Stonehenge, and I get it. I completely get it. And that has been happening time of way back immemorial.
yeah,
Literally, it when they put because they sadly did close off Stonehenge to the general public, people started having to pay for tickets all the way back in 1901.
yeah.
But when they did that, they actually closed off 5 public footpaths that converged on Stonehenge. So people were forever just walking towards this interesting monument from all different directions. It's got this, we call it, well, I did it years ago now, but I did a lecture called Stonehenge Humanity. And it has that. It just, every single day, I can guarantee you someone somewhere is coming to look at Stonehenge.
Yeah,
To be
yeah.
honest, it's more likely to
From
be 1,000, 2,000 people every day are going to come and walk
yeah,
past Stonehenge, whether they have a ticket or not. They just want to see it.
yeah.
And
From
and
all around
and,
the
and
world.
absolutely. And roads like the 303, they impact that in the memory of certainly the Brits. But this time of year, to be honest, Tommy, it's not all that. Well, it is quite a lot of Brits coming to see us still, but it's about 40% of our visitors, maybe 35 at a push, to be
Really?
honest. And as summer gets into, as we get into high summer, it's normally lots of overseas visitors. It's something like a 60-40 split that gets. And we have at the moment, I've got a huge amount of guys and girls from the United States and China and Japan, and it'll go in phases as the school holidays go on. So you get people from Germany and all that. It's
Yeah.
wonderful to watch. It's just this,
Yeah. Yeah.
like a ribbon of humanity just wandering past the stones and taking a selfie,
Yeah.
and
Yeah. Yeah,
speculating
mate.
about whether it was aliens or how they got there, or
Yeah.
you hear the same
Well,
conversations.
we'll get into that for sure.
Oh, absolutely. I've got a few ideas.
Yeah, I love that. I've got to ask you this because when I was little, I remember we used to drive past the stones and my dad would pull up, and I can actually remember walking over to the stones and touching them. Right. I actually have this memory of
Yeah.
actually touching the stones on a number of occasions. And then I spoke to a guide when I was there, and he said that they've always been blocked off. So there's always been a guard there. But he said possibly the guard could have been gone and you could have had a moment where you could have touched the stones. But I've just got this memory of touching them and being in between them. I don't know if I was allowed to be or
That's such
but
a common. I had that conversation so many times with people, Tommy, honestly. And
yeah.
it depends. I don't want to be rude, but how old are you?
So I'm 35.
So
So this was
technically,
about from like 4 years old onwards. So
yeah.
from a young age.
So the often trotted out line is that from 1978, the inner rope went up. But what's not known so often is the fact that because this upset so many people, there were special occasions, there were days of the week, or actually days of the month, where people were allowed to go in to placate this sort of, oh, what do you mean? We were always allowed to go in before. So very gradually, they sort of eased it off. So as I understand it, for a while, is if you went in on a Tuesday, you could go in into the Central Stones.
Really?
Yeah,
Okay.
and then it became one Tuesday a month.
Yeah.
And then by the time you get to sort of like 85, as I understand it, absolutely no way were you getting inside those
Wow.
stones unless it was a solstice. But in 1985, and it's a big long story I can talk to you about later, but in 1985 is when we get the Battle of Beanfield, and that's when solstice access to Stonehenge is stopped. It's
Okay.
so that's it, the whole access to Stonehenge thing is such a
Yeah.
such a controversial subject
Yeah.
and a history in itself. I mean, I can quite happily go into it at great length. It's actually quite interesting. I mean,
Yeah.
because
Yeah.
who does own Stonehenge, and who has a right to let people in, and that side of things can nothing causes more conflict at Stonehenge than that question.
Yeah. Yeah.
There's this and you almost certainly, if you have that memory, I believe you did
Yeah.
get in there, but
I probably shouldn't have been allowed to.
mate, I don't know.
Don't tell anyone, man. I'm
Maybe
sorry.
there's other things. No, I won't tell a soul. You're cool, mate. The
It's my
thing is
dad's
that
fault.
I think security used to go home at like 5 o'clock and stuff. I've heard stories like this. I've heard
Really?
it time and time again. But I find that hard to, because I'm a researcher, and I find that hard to back up with the evidence I found from 85 through to about 92, 93.
Yeah.
The stones are guarded very, very vigorously with, I've got pictures of razor wire. One
Wow.
of the least known facts about Stonehenge is that in 1986 it was the scene of the largest mass arrest in modern British history.
Really?
Yeah. And like 1985 at the Battle of Beanfield, you got 420 people being arrested by the police and tried, and all basically found not guilty, but losing their homes and all that. And it's all about trying to get to Stonehenge. And
Wow.
it's this whole, because it's about building to a head now with solstice. There's the huge countercultural thing that happens with the stones. So ultimately in 1974, there's this wonderful chap called Philip Russell. Okay, Phil Russell is he's a really beautiful soul. I've researched him relentlessly now, and I probably will write a book about him at one stage. But he basically is quite well to do. He's a young lad. His dad leaves home, runs off with another lady. His mum begrudges this fact because, get this, when his dad dies, he leaves the house and the money to his son and not to his estranged wife. which means he's loaded, but he's about 15.
Yeah.
So his mum gets the ump, and she disappears off with another husband, and Phil is left with a guardian and a heck of a lot of money. Okay. And what he does, and he is a beautiful soul, but what he does is he's an artist, and he decides, so bear in mind, we're talking, let's get the right date. So we're probably talking at this time, we're talking about 1967. We're talking around about him. He quite likes acid. He takes a lot of acid. And he uses that to express his art. And he's famous. Yeah. He's famous for his art to the stage where he starts sending it to celebrities, people like Russell Harty, who were really famous at the time, if you know what I'm on about.
Yeah.
But his mum comes back and says, son, I've missed you. How are you doing? And he goes, guess what, mum? I'm an artist. Look at this. I did it all on acid. And she reports him to the police, and they've quite literally just invented the drug squad. He's one of the first, if not the first, he's the second conviction in the Hampshire drug squad. And they lock him up. And by part of his to try and lessen his sentence, or to try and, because he's an intelligent lad, he's encouraged by the police to write a prospectus on drugs, so that the police know about all these different drugs, because they don't really have much of a clue what's the difference between hash and this and that and all. And he writes this wonderful document. It's about 10,000 words, talking about all the different drugs and what they do and what he thinks. And eventually he's released. And when he's released, he's got loads of money. His mum's gone again. And he's got this idea of having a peace and love party. And he's gone full, what we used to call hippie, but we don't call hippie anymore. We just say sort of new age, and he's a wonderful guy. And he comes up with this idea with his newfound freedom that he's going to travel the world. But he's not allowed, because he's kind of on probation. They say, right, you've got to stay with this chap called Dr. Hatfield. He's going to be your guardian. Okay. And you stay with him for a bit, and Dr. Hatfield will make sure you're not going to go all crazy again. And Dr. Hatfield and him strike up this relationship. And after about 3-4 months, he's allowed to go traveling the world. And he sends postcard after postcard after postcard to Dr. Hatfield, and they're amazing. And Dr. Hatfield's kept them all. There's about 45 of them. And I've been lucky enough to accrue some of them. And he goes on these world travels around Ibiza, and he meets people like Peter Sellers and Spike Milligan, and he ends up in films with them. And he has this amazing, anyway,
Wow.
long and short of it, honestly, he's incredible. I've got the film which he appears in. He meets these incredible people, but he comes up with this idea of the Stonehenge Free Festival, of peace and love. And he wants to bring everyone together in love and harmony. And he writes to every single British Airways hostess and invites them. He invites the Dalai Lama. He writes to Margaret Thatcher and tells her she can't come. And he writes to, even though she wasn't PM yet, but he writes to all these people he doesn't like. And he says, I don't want you coming. And the Radio Caroline, which was a famous pirate radio station back then, there's a film about it called The Boat That Rocked.
Okay, yeah.
Yeah, they started plugging this festival as well. I've got some of the adverts in my archives. And it gets a real interest now. It's the Stonehenge summer solstice of love, and people start turning up. So in 1974, the DJs from Radio Caroline turn up in a limousine and dark glasses and get lots of attention. One band called Zorch, who were like an electro-punk synthesizer group, and about 200 people turn up. And they have a party at Stonehenge. It doesn't end. Basically, it carries on for a couple of weeks. And by the end of it, by the time we get to sort of like November, there's still 40 of them left in the field,
Wow.
right next to Stonehenge, having a party.
That's
And
a long party, man.
It's honestly, it's an amazing, they're having a good time. But the police have come up with a tactic to get rid of them, right? They've said, right, what we're going to do is we're going to find out the names, and each of them will get an injunction, and then they won't be able to be there anymore. They have to be 50 miles away. So these guys, bless them, Wally Hope and the others, they come up with the idea of giving the name Wally. So you would be Wally Tommy. I am actually now officially Wally Fish, but every time they give a fake name: Wally Sparkle, Wally Hope, Wally Sunshine, Wally Woof for the dog. They gave all these different names, and the police didn't know how to deal with this. Their paperwork couldn't cope with it. So these guys kept on escaping this injunction and staying there until it ends up in the High Court, and it's getting loads of media attention now. and they're in the papers being called the Waddies of Wessex. And there's this amazing interview with Philip Russell, who now is calling himself Wally Hope. And he's at the High Court, and he's got this lovely Brummie accent, and they're basically saying to him, so you've lost at the High Court, you now have to move away from Stonehenge. What are you going to do? And he goes, I'm just going to float above Stonehenge and spend the day over. But what they do is they just move to the next field, and it really, really frustrates the authorities. It gets worse and worse, and it builds up, and they're getting ultra hacked off for these guys, and they start working against them, and they realise that Wally Hope, Philip Russell, is the leader, and he's got tons of money. And by the time when he gets to 25, he's due to inherit the whole lot. And by this time, he's investigating buying a farm next to Stonehenge. And now the authorities are really scared, because if this guy gets a farm next to Stonehenge, he can have a party and no one can stop him.
Yeah,
he can invite all of his friends, and the authorities can't do anything about it. And anyway, they go through all these hoops, and there's a kind of tragedy to this story. But ultimately, Philip is we're building up to summer solstice 75. And there's lots of free festivals happening at this time. There's one at Windsor in the Queen's back garden, and lots of them that you could move about like a circuit almost. You could go round and tour. Notting Hill Carnival was involved, Porton Down, Torture Town, and all this sort of stuff, all these different freedom camps. And what ends up happening is that while moving between these camps in his I'm not joking, in his rainbow-coloured 2CV, not conspicuous at all, Wally Hope parks up outside a squat in Amesbury, and while he's in this squat in Amesbury, the military police bash down the door and come in because they're looking for a deserter, and there's a lot of military camps around the Stonehenge area, and so they have this right. They come in, bash. Where is he? And well, we don't know who you're on about, but it turns out they search the area, and there's a 16-year-old lad who has got some LSD tabs on him, some little bits of LSD on him, which were very popular at the time. And the police go to say, right, son, you're coming with me. And Wally says, no, they're mine. Takes them and gets this kid off the hook, but gets put in the slammer. And while he's in the slammer, while he's in jail, I think it's the second day he's in jail or something like that, he reports to parade, and he's, in those days, you used to have to wear a prison uniform, and he's still wearing his pajamas. And they said, well, why aren't you wearing a prison uniform? He said, well, it's itchy. It's itchy. I don't like it. And they say, who am I talking to? And this was a trick. And he said, well, you're talking to Wally Hope, man. And on that, they got him transferred to a schizophrenic hospital, because they were able to argue he had two different personalities. Oh, he thinks he's Wally Hope. He's so spaced out. We need to bring this hippie spaceman down to earth. And there was very much that thought, because he had taken a lot of acid, and he probably was a little bit, very spaced, but it was an incredible guy. Anyway, so what they do then is they take him to the local mental hospital, which was called the Old Manor. It's closed now. Ironically, it used to be owned by the man who owned Stonehenge. And he's given the chemical kosh, which basically zombies him down, brings him right down to earth. And they keep him like that right up until 3 days after summer solstice 1975, when they knew he would be the figurehead of this huge party that was going to happen at Stonehenge. And they release him, and he is a shadow of himself. He's just like he's scared of the light. He's scared of people. He shuffles and doesn't work. And he's Dr. Hatfield, who's still his guardian. He comes to stay back with Dr. Hatfield, who is a GP. He knows his stuff. And Dr. Hatfield, and he wrote brilliantly about Philip, but he diagnoses him almost immediately with dyskinesia, which is an effect of this massive drug not that he'd taken himself, that had been enforced on him. And I'm sorry, I don't want to bring it down too much, but
that's cool.
About 2-3 weeks later, he goes to a festival, and his friends are like, well, what's happened to Wally? This sun worshipper, he won't go in the sun. He's trying his best, but it's not. He's kind of a shadow of himself.
Yeah.
And and he ends up passing away, choking on his own food alone at home, passing away. And
Wow.
he there's conspiracy theories. There were stories about he was wiped out by the authorities, but his
Yeah.
official cause of death was that he choked on his food. He was a very young man.
Really?
Yeah,
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 man.
yeah. And Dr. Hatfield campaigned to try and get the truth out
Yeah.
and all that sort of stuff. But this is where it gets deeper, dude. It's like, so it's an amazing deep story. But it's so sad. So sadly, Wally, the man who's had this innocent dream of love and hope at Stonehenge and has brought happiness to so many people, his light's extinguished. But at the festival, the solstice, they gather his ashes. His ashes are gathered and placed in a box, which on the top of this beautifully ornate box, it says Wally Hope, victim of ignorance. And every solstice, certainly since 76, they bring this box into the middle of Stonehenge, which contains some of his postcards, some of his ashes, and they, for want of using an English word, I'm sure there's lots of, they skin up on it. They make a joint and they smoke it,
Yeah.
in honor of the life of Wally Hope. And that's how traditionally at summer solstice the sort of celebrations open.
Oh, wow.
It sounds really strange, right? So,
Yeah.
and it's a very unofficial thing. I should say, although I work for English Heritage, this is something that they have no control over. This is,
Yeah.
they're custodians of the stones, but it's a
But
religious place.
this still takes place now.
This still takes place now, right? And the reason I know this is true is because go back 5 years ago, maybe 6 years ago, I was at Stonehenge in my capacity as a guy talking about Stonehenge, stood there saying, stay back, can I answer your questions? Oh, it's a concrete repair. Let me take your photo, that sort of stuff. Of which I pride myself. But occasionally somebody is an idiot, and somebody, we have radios, and you hear from various different points. Because if you want, I'm like at the citadel in the middle, and you've got fences way back. So and I've got in my radio, okay, this guy's just gone straight through security. We can't stop him. Okay, and they call for more security. Oh, no one can stop him. We don't know what's happening. He's just walking straight at us. And they're getting spooked, and my colleagues are saying we can't do anything. So he ends up in my zone, and everyone's leaving him alone. And I'm like, well, I'm not going to try and stop this. I'm not going to rugby tackle this guy to the ground. But I want to work out what's going on in his head, and that sort of stuff, to do my best to protect Stonehenge. Now, can I sort of bargain with this guy? Can I somehow? So a lot of my colleagues are getting flustered, and I'm getting very close to Stonehenge now, and he keeps sidestepping me, and I'm like, can I help? What do you want to talk about? And he's got a box around his neck. He's wearing a box around his neck, and he gets closer and closer and closer, and he gets right up next to Stonehenge. He takes this box off, opens it up, he pulls out, and I'm not joking, probably the largest joint I've seen in my life. And then he pours a drink into a little shot glass, took a sip himself, and then poured the other half over the stones, lit this joint, turned to me, and he went, I'm done now, mate. Should we go?
Wow.
Yeah, man, right? And I walked him out of Stonehenge. I walked side by side with him, and I said, look, what was that all about? And he goes, have you ever heard of Philip Russell? I said, no, I never heard of him, man. And he goes, right, let me tell you a story. And he told me that story, and I walked him out, and we've been friends ever since. But yeah,
wow, man,
that's how come I came to tell you that, bro.
Wow.
It's just like, so it's like there's a cyclical nature with Stonehenge.
Yeah.
And I can add a slight appendix to that. But I gave a talk this time last year, and it was one of the hardest talks I've ever had to give, because I was talking about the Battle of Beanfield, and I was talking about Philip's story. And I've researched it for years, and it means a lot to me. And it's living memory. There's people who are alive who knew him, people I know who I've spoken to online who knew him.
Yeah.
So you want to be really careful you don't tread on their toes. And I was doing this talk, and just as I got to starting talking about Philip Russell, this guy walked into the room, and he had a box around his neck, and he put it in front of me, and he said, "Don't let him down, mate." And it was Philip Russell's ashes.
Wow.
And I was like, oh, okay. And I had tears. I was just like,
yeah.
okay,
Wow,
really
man.
hard. Yeah. So
that gave me goosebumps.
Good, because that's the way it
Yeah.
works, man. There's
Yeah.
powerful stuff at those stones.
Yeah, for
It's
sure.
you know what I mean. It means that there's a lot of people's lives that are centered around that place,
Yeah. Yeah.
and I honestly think that I was meant to experience that, so I was meant to tell that story to as many people as I could.
Yeah. And you're keeping that,
Because yeah,
story alive. Yeah.
and I keep doing it. I keep telling people because I think it needs to be told.
Yeah. Well, thank you very much for sharing that, man.
You're
It's
very welcome, Tommy. Sorry
super
I went on a bit
interesting.
then.
No, not at all. That's great. Super interesting, man. Wow. So when it comes to the stones, what are your theories on? I know this is just theories and we don't know, but what are your theories on how we got there, what they are?
No, well, the thing is that for me, and there's so many different people with different theories and all of that sort of stuff. I think we're pretty much, most archaeologists are settled on how the stones got there. There's a set of phases as they explain it. So if you didn't know, a henge is a circular bank and ditch that's dug by our ancestors, and they didn't have metal tools because it's from the Stone Age, it's from the Neolithic, the very last bit of the Stone Age. But they're using antler picks and they're using sort of shoulder bones of cattle or sheep because they're good digging implements, and we know that because bits broke off and we found them there. But they dig this quite wide circle and they build up a chalk bank, and I think the fact that it's chalk and it's white is important. And then inside this really quite vast circle, they placed 56 burial points. So 3,100 BC or BCE, or whichever way you want to put it, think about 5,000 years before now, they did this. They created a circle and they placed 56 burials. Now, archaeologists have only dug into 19 of those because we want to leave stuff for future archaeologists. Archaeology is so destructive.
Wow.
People don't realize that if you can't dig somewhere more for the first time more than once, right?
Yeah.
The primary evidence is only there on the first dig. After that, you're picking up other bits. And that's the problem with Stonehenge. So you want to preserve as much of it as you can.
Yeah.
And hope that people haven't fiddled about with it, to be quite brutally honest.
Yeah.
And there's loads of stories about that.
Is that the hope that the technology is going to get better at how we excavate? Yeah. Wow.
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, so with these 56 pits, right? They when they were dug by this chap called I think it's Lieutenant General Hawley, and he was given the gig in 1920, right? And he was kind of given the gig without much watching over him, and that way he was literally allowed to do what he wanted for 7 years at Stonehenge. So he's a qualified archaeologist and he's digging around, but he concentrates on those pits that I was just saying about, these 56 pits, digs into 19 of them. In 17 of them, he finds cremated human remains, right? Not just one person, quite a few people. And again, not wishing to be too grim, but if you ever get cremated in the modern era, after you're burnt, your remains get sort of crushed a little bit in this sort of like a peppermill thing to make them to smaller. But back then, they're literally burning them 1,000 degrees, cracking the bones. So you end up with a bit more evidence, and you can see bits and pieces. They're finding amber beads and stuff like that, Mr. Hawley is, or Lieutenant General Colonel, whatever his name was. But after you've found all these cremated remains, what can you do with them? It's 1920. I've got a load of cremated remains. I don't know what to do. So what Hawley does is he reburies them. I did a video on YouTube about this and TikTok, but he reburies them at another site in Stonehenge and places a stone over them, puts them all in one big box, because as far as he's concerned, well, we can't, don't know what we can do with that.
Yeah.
But my God, now archaeologists with, a small burnt piece of bone can tell you so much more. We've got things like strontium analysis and all these different things they can do with isotope analysis, and they can work out incredible amounts of information. But because of what Hawley did, you got all these bones, took them out of these pits, 17 pits, put them all in one pit, and it kind of, we can find things out about those bones, but maybe there was something relevant about each pit. Maybe one pit was just for girls. Maybe one pit was just for boys. Maybe they were from one different region. Maybe they were different ages.
Yeah.
There's all that sort of stuff.
Creates a lot of questions that can't be answered now.
Yeah, so I think modern archaeologists are much more, I mean, I'm a social historian by qualification, but they're much more worried about that than they were back then.
Yeah.
And Stonehenge is quite literally the birthplace of modern archaeology. Before they go to Egypt, they're messing around with Stonehenge. They call themselves antiquarians, and they're literally curious vicars who've got a couple of burial mounds in their land, and they're like, let's have a look at this. Speed. I'll write this up and put it in the newsletter. And that is repeatedly what happens around the landscape. It's quite funny until you get grown-ups like William Colt Hall getting involved and giving real funding, and that's literally how archaeology starts. Really, it's certainly in this country is curious landowners looking for treasure, looking for gold, and all that sort of stuff.
Yeah. So there's actually quite a lot of untouched land on the Stonehenge itself that we've not explored yet. That's interesting.
Yeah, about half of the monument itself is protected for future archaeologists.
Wow.
I've worked there 10 years now, and I've only known of one dig that's happened inside Stonehenge, and that was 2 years before I got there. There's been one dig that I visited on the landscape, because the World Heritage Site, that's the other thing. So Stonehenge sits in the sort of like triangle of land, monument field, but the World Heritage Site that sort of echoes around it is 14 square kilometres. So there's lots and lots of other sites that surround it. So we had a dig at Durrington Walls about 6 years ago, something like that. But it's the only real digging that's been happening recently is to do with the Stonehenge tunnel, which I'm not sure if you've heard about that. But
what's that?
So there's been, I was actually working the day it happened when they announced it, but again, a real reinforcement about what a weird place Stonehenge is to work. So I'm just stood in front of Stonehenge, and somebody erects a lectern in front of Stonehenge. It must be said there was quite a lot of security guards about that day, and they weren't our security guards. And then the then Prime Minister David Cameron walks up the path, and the ropes are lifted, and he started talking directly to the news at 1 to announce that there's going to be a public expenditure of 27. I know it wasn't, it was more than that. It's like £40 million or maybe, and they're going to build a tunnel under Stonehenge. And But the idea is the 303, which is a very slow road that goes past Stonehenge, but an iconic road. There's books written about it, there's songs written about it. It's a very famous road. They want to tunnel it for about 2 miles, not under Stonehenge, but under the landscape that surrounds Stonehenge, certainly under the Stonehenge World Heritage Site.
Yeah.
So one of the big conflicts locally, and I do live really quite close to Stonehenge at the moment, is that question: is it right or is it wrong to build this huge, great tunnel through the landscape? And it's a massive infrastructure project, but it was promised, and I'm not joking, it was promised at least 8 years ago, because we're talking Cameron and all that sort of stuff, and ain't happened yet. And I probably shouldn't say, because I don't want your listeners to hate me, but I'm a local parish councillor, so I'm an elected member of the sort of like very, very lowest level of government, but in the parish level. And my parish is in the Stonehenge World Heritage Site, and that's one of the reasons I am, because I'm passionate about access to Stonehenge and footpaths and making sure everything's looked after. So that's my entire motivation. It's mainly about bin day, to be honest with you, from my experience of being a parish councillor now. It's 4 years of being a parish councillor. A lot of it's meetings about so and so left their bins out and all that. But the idea of protecting this landscape is really important to me. And,
for sure, man.
It's something that it needs to be looked after. And it's if we don't, it gets. But it needs to be very conflicted, because in some ways, what they're promising with the tunnel is that once the tunnel is built, there'll be no roads near Stonehenge, in view of Stonehenge. There'll be byways and cycleways that cross the landscape, and fences will be lifted, and the landscape will be. They paint this picture.
Yeah, man.
This beautiful picture, right? They paint this utopian picture, but it's all prospectuses. And
just leave it alone, because they don't know. They don't know what could be under there. They could be digging up something very deep. Yeah.
Well, their argument is that, you'll never know if we don't do this because we're digging. Look, that's kind of it's a proper. But you are right. I personally, I don't want to see it happen, but it's very conflicting. And it's probably, it's a bit like Brexit around here. It's one of those polarizing things. If you speak to the people in local villages, you don't talk about the tunnel.
Is there a bit of a divide? There's a
Oh,
bit of
heck yeah. Oh, absolutely. Yeah, yeah, yeah. Generally, the people who live really, really close to the tunnel are, I mean, it's going to be a 4-year, 5-year project if they start digging. And
yeah,
it's all about the local road networks and stuff like that. Just like it is with people in lives. And there's a bit of
yeah,
NIMBYism
yeah,
there as well. We don't want a
yeah,
tunnel there.
yeah,
But it's quite a massive infrastructure project, though, because it is
yeah.
basically a 2-mile long tunnel under the downs of Stonehenge to try and restore the landscape. But get this, the people who protect Stonehenge, apart from English Heritage and UNESCO, who are, they create these World Heritage sites, but there's lots of World Heritage sites. Sorry, I sound patronising. There's lots of World Heritage sites all over the world.
Yeah.
But UNESCO, I'm going to get this right, I'm going to remember, United Nations Educational, Culture and Scientific Organization, or something like that, maybe the other way around. They listed Stonehenge and its landscape as a protected area, which is a really good thing. But they said if that tunnel gets built, they will remove that status from Stonehenge. So they're
Oh
holding it like a
wow.
sword of, yeah, they're holding it like a sword of Damocles over
Yeah.
English Heritage and the National Trust and the guys involved with the project. But,
Wow, man.
yeah, there's so many different avenues for Stonehenge. There's so many
Yeah,
different ways
because
you can go.
you've probably seen, I don't know the name of it, but in France, recently the Stonehenge of
Yes,
France, they called it, has been
Barnack.
destroyed.
Barnack. Oh
Oh
no, we
man,
were
what's
talking
he?
about this. We were talking about this in the staff room today, and
Yeah,
it came up on my radar last week. So the Karnak stones, again, so they're like a massive long ribbon of stones in France that travel many, many, many miles, and some of them are more obvious than other ones. But I think this comes down to a mayor who gave permission to
yeah,
move some of the stones. And even though these stones, apparently they're only about 30 or 40 centimeters above the ground, they're still part of this and they're very heavily protected. But that kind of proves the point, because up in this country, up until 1860, nothing was protected. You know, nobody had an obligation to look after anything. You know, they had maybe a moral obligation.
yeah,
I'm the custodian of this castle. I put this back up. And, you know, I want a visitor to get hit on the head and all that sort of stuff.
yeah.
But you didn't actually have a legal obligation, and they bring in this thing called the Ancient Monuments Act in 1860, which lists 30 structures in England and 30 structures in Scotland, that the owners of those structures are duty bound to make sure they don't fall down anymore, make sure they're as protected as much as they possibly can. And that's what kind of makes the guy who owned Stonehenge at the time, Sir Edmund Antrobus, that was what makes him decide that he has to start doing things about it,
Yeah.
and looking after it better. But it's also, you've got people from the Wiltshire Archaeological Society coming and looking at Stonehenge and visiting and writing awful letters to the press about the state of Stonehenge and what's going on. There's amazing. I wrote a paper. I wrote a thing a few years ago called Cucumber Rinds and Bottle Tops, and it was basically the fact that they went to Stonehenge in disguise. I should add, the Wiltshire Archaeological Society, all these professors and doctors, they went in disguise and they walked around Stonehenge and they took notes of the damage that had happened since last time they'd visited, and it was like a year since they'd last visited. And it was things like a piece of sarsen stone the size of a horse's head has been removed from this stone, and I found nothing but cucumber rinds wherever I looked, and broken bottles. And they get increasingly more worried about it.
Yeah.
This builds on Sir Edmund Antrobus, who gets more and more annoyed with them, to be honest with you. But it's so annoying as a researcher, because there's 4 Sir Edmund Antrobuses in a row,
Okay.
and they all own Stonehenge.
Oh
And
wow.
they're all radically different characters, and it goes
Yeah.
from there. It's in
That's
their family from. Oh, it's so confusing when you try
yeah.
and write about it. So they own it from 1825 to 1915, and
Okay.
there's these 4, and I mean, I researched this, but ownership of Stonehenge is a really interesting wormhole to go down.
Yeah.
So as far as I've been able to take it back, and I've gone. So as I said, we have the Antrobuses. So I'll tell you what goes on after the Antrobuses, but we'll go back a bit. So we go, the Antrobuses, they actually end up getting Stonehenge. They buy it from the Marquess of Queensberry. Now, the Marquess of Queensberry is famous for inventing the rules of boxing. If you
Okay.
didn't know, they're still referred to as the Queensberry Rules. So he codified punching people legally. The Marquis of Queensberry, he somehow acquired it or bought it from the Seymour family, Edward Seymour, and that's how it. And Edward Seymour was the brother of Jane Seymour, who married Henry VIII. Now,
Wow.
Henry VIII nicked Stonehenge, literally took it off the church, because Stonehenge before that point was on the land of Amesbury Abbey, which was a church, a place of worship, church, just a monastery, one of the oldest monasteries in England. And Henry VIII wanted to get married again, and he wasn't all that popular with that. You know, he's starting his own breakaway church, so he's like, "I'll nick that off those guys. It's my Abbey
Yeah.
now, and you can have Stonehenge if I can perhaps meet your sister
Yeah.
and all that sort of stuff." And that's what happened.
Wow.
And then you go even further back from that. The Abbey, Amesbury Abbey, was created by King Alfred in AD 99, AD 999, because Salisbury is very close to Wilton, which was Alfred's capital.
Okay.
And I can't take it back any further than that. But
Yeah,
so it goes all
interesting.
that way back where people own it. So people often say
Yeah.
to me, like, "Oh, you know, what do you mean someone owns Stonehenge?" And you're like, "Well, there's people own
Someone's,
things, you know,
yeah,
and
for
someone, you
sure,
know,
man.
if you got
Yeah.
the money, it's yeah."
And someone
But
owned it way back before we can, you know.
absolutely, absolutely, and you would have been able to visit, and you would have almost certainly been able to walk around it. But if you got caught hunting around there or something like that, you're in trouble. And
Yeah.
Edmund Antrobus no, is it third? Yeah, Edmund Antrobus the third. He's getting loads of pressure. So, well, okay, jumping back and forth in history, but so we said about the Ancient Monuments Act in 1860. So Edmund Antrobus the third, he's got Stonehenge at that point, right? And while he's got Stonehenge, he's looking after Stonehenge. He's getting more and more pressure to look after it better, and he's like, "All right, okay, I'll tell you what, I'll sell it to you." And it's in the papers. You can find it on the archives. And he offers to sell Stonehenge for £80,000 in 1870.
That's a lot of money.
£80,000, right?
Yeah.
That is an insane amount of money back then. A crazy amount of money. But he also says, "I wish to retain the right to fox hunt and shoot across the land whenever I wish." And I was like, nobody takes him up on it. And I was like, "No, you're mad. What are you on about?" And then it goes on, and eventually we get to the fourth of the Antrobus line. There's lots of stories. There's a bit of money that they got from a particularly dodgy place. Slavery is not going to be mentioned there. But yeah, there's all those sort of weird little lines that they're caught up in. But Edmund Antrobus the fourth, I really, really like. He's a top bloke. And when he gets it, he's like, "I'm going to be different than all the other ones. I'm just going to get along with people." And almost as soon as he's got control of Stonehenge, one of the stones falls over. And everyone's like, "You're not looking after Stonehenge. A stone has fallen over. How could you do that?" Not only that, two stones fell over in
Oh, wow.
1900, January the 1st, 1900, right? These two stones fall over. It's in all the papers. It could be heard 3 miles away and all that sort of stuff that you hear. You're like, maybe. But yeah, these stones fall, and he gets so much hassle in the press. They're like, "What have you done? You're not doing a good job." And so he's like, "Okay, what I will do is I will do everything I can in my power to make sure no more stones fall over." And at this point, there's a stone called, it's so nerdy to say, all the stones have numbers, but take it from me, the tallest stone at Stonehenge is called Stone 56, the very, very tallest stone at
Okay.
Stonehenge.
Yeah.
And it's right on the winter solstice alignment. It's a key point for Stonehenge. But at that moment, that stone was at a 45-degree angle, and it was rested on another stone, one of the smaller stones, the blue stones. And he was under this pressure to do something about it. So he said, "Right, what I will do is I will get an architect and I will get an archaeologist, and I will straighten this stone with their help under my own cost. I will pay for it. I will pay for it." Which he does. And this lovely chap called William Gowland comes in, who's a pioneer of archaeology. He's the first person ever to use grid works. So those sort of like grid squares they lay down, and he draws everything in stratigraphic layers. He's a proper archaeologist, as you'd recognise nowadays. He's been doing lots of work in Japan. He comes over. He's called the father of archaeology in Japan. He's very well respected. And he has this other chap called Detmar Blow, who is a roving architect who goes around building these amazing buildings, like just down the road from me, Lake House, which is actually where Steen lives, and Wilsford Manor, and all these amazing buildings that he's brought in because he's in the area. And they straighten this stone up, but it costs bucks. And Mr. Antrobus is like, right, I'm going to put a fence around Stonehenge, and I'm going to start charging people 1 shilling to see Stonehenge, because it's costing me money. I've got to keep a policeman here now because he has to keep people away from works at the stones. And that's when you end up with this tradition of tickets being paid for Stonehenge, basically to pay for the very first phase of restoring Stonehenge for Mr. Antrobus. And the thing about that is that's another one of my most commonly asked questions is like, when do you start paying? I have to pay for a ticket. It's 1901.
Yeah,
there are times when you can get in and you can get in the solstices and stuff, but yeah, it's 1901.
Yeah,
That's a cast iron fact. But by doing that, he really upsets a load of people. Okay, because I've been able to go to Stonehenge forever. What do you mean I can't go in there now just because you're straightening this? You're loaded and all that sort of mentality. And there's lots of protests there, and it ends up in the High Court. And in the High Court, Edmund Antrobus argues that he bought Stonehenge from the Marquis of Queensberry and produces the deeds, and it's an open and shut case back then, and that's it. And Stonehenge is protected.
Yeah,
and this is where it gets really weird, because like Mr. Antrobus, like I said, Edmund Antrobus IV is a bit cooler than the others, and he starts to get his druid on. He starts to get a little bit like, you know what, I fancy a solstice or two, and he turns up more and more regularly. And then by 1906. He's full on initiated as a druid at Stonehenge at the sunrise on summer solstice.
wow.
Not only that, but with 3 MPs, and who also get initiated, because it's quite popular to be a druid back then.
Yeah,
and everything's all harmonious and lovely until 1915, where his son's drafted into the Grenadier Guards as an officer. And I should also say that the year before this happened, there was a falling out at the stones at summer solstice, and so Edmund Antrobus kicked out one of the druid groups. He said, "Get out, get out!" Blah, 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 for want of another group. And this druidic leader, this high priest, he put a curse on Sir Edmund Antrobus, and this is reported. It sounds like I'm making this up. This is reported in national newspapers of the time. This again, it'll be in my book one day. But he puts this curse called the Hera. And it means that anyone that is in range of this curse that is directed to will die within a year.
Oh, wow.
So, yeah, right. And so Edmund Antrobus is there, and his son's there, and this policeman's there. So in 1915, Sir Edmund Antrobus' son goes to fight in Ypres and is mown down by machine gun fire. 2 months later, Sir Edmund Antrobus dies. Some say of a broken heart. Because he's lost his son.
Yeah.
And the policeman died a week later. Right. And then Stonehenge is, because the family think, oh, this place is, there's some weird, juju going on and that sort of stuff. And they knew already that before he died, Sir Edmund Antrobus had expressed a wish to put Stonehenge up for auction. He talked about it in the press and all that sort of stuff. So that's when Stonehenge quite literally went up for sale in a public auction. And you could buy yourself Stonehenge. And it sold for a ridiculously small amount of money in the end, bearing in mind that like 90 years ago or so, they were asking for 50, 60, 70 grand for it. When it went to auction in Salisbury, a local cricketer called Cecil Chubb, should add there was a cricket pitch right next to Stonehenge, who used to play there regularly from the nearest village called Shrewton. He decided to start raising his hand and bidding for this. Now, the National Trust had been tipped off that if they got to this auction with about £10,000, maybe £20,000, would secure them Stonehenge for their own. And the National Trust really, really wanted it because they were quite newly formed back then. But the train they got, there were two people carrying two separate suitcases, each with £10,000 in. Their train from London broke down.
Oh,
They
man.
they never got to the auction, right?
Wow.
So Cecil Chubb, everyone, the auctioneer's like, £6,000? Anyone? Anyone? And yeah, and Cecil Chubb says, right, 6,600 quid.
Wow.
And he gets Stonehenge.
Bargain.
Yeah, he buys Stonehenge. Not only that, right? It's not even his money, it's his wife's money.
Oh,
He's
wow.
like,
I just bought Stonehenge.
Yeah, he literally, right? His wife, he marries
Wow.
he marries this lady called Mary Finch, and her uncle owns, again, this is the word of the time, but the largest sanitarium in the whole of Europe, which happened to be in Salisbury, the old manor, the same place Phil ended up, Phil Russell we were talking about earlier, and he owns that at this point. And yeah, Cecil Chubb ends up marrying her, inherits this huge amount of money, spends her money. The famous, again, back to bad tour guide mode, they say he went there to buy curtains and chairs. We don't know that, but apparently he went to buy curtains and chairs for the hospital, and he came back with Stonehenge.
Wow.
Like, I bought Stonehenge, darling. How do you feel about that?
That's like something I would do. When I get sent to the shop, I always buy the wrong thing. Come
It's
back
not
with
going to go down well, is
Stonehenge.
it?
Wow, man. It's so interesting.
Yeah, so it's a really weird one because so in 1915, he's got Stonehenge. He is in charge of it. But you've got to remember, by 1915, we're right in the middle of World War One.
Yeah.
It's kicking off left, right, and centre. And Stonehenge, thanks to Edmund Antrobus III, has got a humongous military base right next to it. Because in 1899, just before he died, he was convinced by the army to sell, I'm not joking, it's like 27,000 acres of plain land to the army so they can practice blowing things up and shooting at things and flying things and training soldiers, just as they do now. We've had a lot of Ukrainian soldiers there recently training now. So he sells that land, and this whole he's changing the landscape almost forever by what's going on. And by building a massive army base right next to Stonehenge, you're going to have lots of soldiers walking past Stonehenge. And then, yeah, it gets crazy. We get up with the whole history of aviation. You've got railway tracks. There's literally a railway to Stonehenge.
When I went to Stonehenge last year, we was walking, and you have to walk through like the little forest up to the stones.
Oh, I'm glad you did that. Went through Fargo Wood.
Beautiful. Yeah, it was awesome.
Absolutely.
The kids loved it. We walked
that
through
was
there.
an airbase. That was
really?
an airbase. That woodland was literally an airbase. It was a massive great airbase. They had these huge great things called Hadley Page bombers. They used it as a training area. There were 4 air bases surrounding Stonehenge. It was RFC Stonehenge, RFC Lake Down, RFC Lake, and they have all these things. You still got Boscombe Down. It used to be called Red Barn back then, but it's now called RAF Boscombe Down. They had all these air bases around it, and they needed to get people and troops in. But this is the really sobering thing. So if you walk through Fargo Wood, you probably saw a memorial cross there.
Yeah,
it's called the Airman's Cross. There's 2 Airman's Crosses at Stonehenge, and the one in Fargo Wood refers to a chap who was taking his pilot's license test. He's literally taking his test, and he lost control and he crashed his plane, and sadly died. But in those fields surrounding Stonehenge, 50% of the people who were learning to fly were killed.
Wow,
not in combat, learning to fly.
Wow.
Not going over and having dogfights. It was
training.
Just the training was so dangerous.
Wow.
And the most dangerous part was the takeoff and the land right next to Stonehenge. It's RFC, so it's Royal Flying Corps, and then by the end of the war it becomes RAF. And they were taking these planes off with huge payloads of bombs. And if your engine cut out and you've got a big payload of bombs and you're 2 feet in the air, there's only one thing that's going to happen, and that's you're going to go hit the ground and you're going to go off like a bomb because you're carrying loads of bombs. So there's so many different levels. There's a really good. Oh, sorry, I keep going on. But
no,
there's a really
awesome,
good,
man.
You're all right with this, Tommy? Sorry.
Yeah, for sure, man. No, this is awesome.
So so there's a famous story very recently that happened. So there was a chap who came to summer solstice about 2 2-3 years ago. Maybe no, I keep forgetting COVID makes things so difficult to arrange.
Yeah.
Maybe 4 years ago, let's say. And he came to Stonehenge at solstice, and he brought his metal detector. He thought he was real clever. I'm going to go around Stonehenge while everyone else is having a party. I'm going to metal detect around there, which is supersonically illegal and very naughty. Okay, because it's the World Heritage Site. I have a metal detector myself. I wouldn't dream of it. All right.
Yeah.
But what he didn't realise he was doing was he was going around all these army test grounds. So he's going around with his metal detector, and he's like, "Oh, I got a cat badge here. I've got this. I don't know what that is." And it's dark. He's not thinking about it. So after solstice is finished, and he's had his, he's sobered up, and he's had a good time and all that. He's on the train on the way back from Stonehenge, and he goes on Facebook taking pictures of what he's found. He's like, "I found this while I was metal detecting at Stonehenge," and he puts on metal detecting groups.
Yeah.
And he's very proudly showing these bits and pieces. And he's on a train on a main. He had a mortar bomb in his hand.
Oh man.
Yeah, a World War I rusty mortar bomb.
Oh wow.
In his hand,
and that could have just gone.
Yeah,
boom at any moment.
And it's just because there's so much of that sort of. During World War I, the landscape around there got very heavily polluted. Not Stonehenge itself, that was still protected, but the fields that surround it. I was walking through Fargo Wood with my colleague a couple of years back now, and he found an old cantina, like a watering can from World War I, which was all rusted out, and it was Australian issue.
Wow.
So it's nuts. The more modern history around Stonehenge is kind of mind blowing.
Wow, it's like the old history and the new history as well. It's amazing.
They all join up. It's like this big Venn diagram of interest.
Yeah,
you get really, really modern stuff like the Brit Award that the KLF dumped in Stonehenge, or you get older stuff like Roman finds and stuff like that. It absolutely. So the last dig they did in the centre of Stonehenge was lovely chap, Professor Timothy Darville, and I think it's about 2008. But they did a really, really small hole, not much wider than sort of like our shoulders in it. And they dug down, and as they were digging down, they were looking for evidence of they were trying to find a broken bit of a certain stone. And they talk about this thing called stratigraphy. So as you go through the layers, that should be older than this, should be older than that, and that should be older than that. Yeah, so it sort of makes some sort of sense. But we have what's referred to as the Stonehenge layer, or the debitage layer, where when they were building Stonehenge, there's lots of broken bits of stone of the type of Stonehenge on the ground. And stuff that's below that would be considered older than Stonehenge. Stratigraphy, if we're talking stratigraphy, I can't even say that word now. And Timothy Darville, he gets to the Stonehenge layer, and he digs down another foot, another 12 inches or so, and then he starts finding Roman coins. And he found 3 Roman coins. It's like, well, why am I finding Roman coins that deep in Stonehenge? And it plays in your mind. The only answer can be that the Romans came to Stonehenge and thought, well, what's this all about? Let's dig a hole, have a look here, or let's place. Yeah. Because it's hard to believe, but we're closer to the Romans than they were to the people who created Stonehenge. So it's like the Romans were 2,000 years ago, right?
Yeah.
And Stonehenge is built 5,000 years ago. So even to the Romans, when they're AD 43 or whatever, they're rocking around the landscape and they're thinking, well, what's this crazy thing?
Yeah, man.
They're thinking, it's already 3,000 years old then. But
that's mad when you think of it like that.
It's insane the time span we're talking about.
Yeah.
And the Romans, pre-Christian Rome, they're still big on solstice. That's still very important in their celebrations. They have something they refer to as Saturnalia, which it happens on solstice, and it ain't a whole heap. It's got, you can see a relationship between it and Christmas. I mean, it's maybe a bit glib to say that, but there's gift giving. The master swaps places with the servants. Everyone plays the fool for a couple of days. It's a time of feasting and happiness, and the Romans definitely do that out to solstice. So maybe they come to Britain and they see this celebration happening at Stonehenge, or something happening at Stonehenge around the winter solstice, and they're thinking, hey, maybe these guys ain't so different than us. Maybe they. I don't know. I'm speculating massively, but
let's party.
But there's similarities between those groups, and and then when the Romans become Christians,
there ain't a big difference between December 21st and December 25th for the celebrations of Christmas and all that sort of stuff. And admittedly, Christmas moves about over the years, but yeah, there's a definite this idea of a celebration, a bringing of people together at the darkest night and the brightest day. Do you know what I mean? That's kind of
man.
There's this, what's the word? The cyclical nature of life itself, the way that we go around this planet, we go around, and the sun does the same thing every year. The moon has its phases, and our ancestors, when they build Stonehenge, they create this fantastic instrument of understanding that we don't understand necessarily for many, many hundreds of years, but then we start getting it again, and it's amazing, a very, very clever place. Impressive place. Yeah,
it's an incredible place. It's an incredible place. The National Trust, they own it now, right? It's National Trust now.
It gets technically the king owns it. Okay. Technically, it's the Crown that owns it. The National Trust, they dearly love to own Stonehenge, but they own everything but Stonehenge.
Oh,
so
really?
Almost every field that surrounds Stonehenge is owned by the National Trust. They were bought off the farmers and gifted to the nation over the years, gifted to the National Trust, who are. But English Heritage, who look after Stonehenge, when I first started working there, I was a civil servant. So they were the word that they used was a quango. So it's a government organisation created to look after government interests. So it was really, when I first started there, it was really, it still is lovely, but there was this definite, we're all historians together type thing. It was very much that way. It was very history. But what happened about 7 years ago or so is that they divided the civil service side and they created a charity. So they got, because basically the government didn't want to pay anymore. So the government didn't like the idea of paying to looking after historic sites, so they created a charity to look after them, which is English Heritage now, as is known. But if you're lucky enough to have a house that's listed or something like that, you hear about people like, I've got a grade listed one building, palace, whatever, that sort of stuff. That's looked after by a group called Historic England, who are still the government civil service side. So they used to be combined, and we were one, and again they've divided us. So it's really changed the way that it works at Stonehenge in many ways. So although we're still all about the history and all about that, it's become much more about trying to get members to the organisation, and rather than relying on this definite every year. Do you know what I mean? So I think if it wasn't for COVID, I think this year they were meant to be completely self-sufficient, but I think next year they're completely self-sufficient or something like that.
Okay.
Because there's like 400 and something sites that English Heritage look after, and the National Trust is a similar type thing with the National Trust, but the National Trust has always been a charity. The National Trust was formed. This is well worth looking into. The Ferguson gang and these lovely people who really eccentric, wealthy ladies and chaps who went around getting very drunk and raising money and giving it to the National Trust, and they would. They'd raised so much money that they could buy these sites all around Stonehenge and stuff. And famously, they would give the money in ridiculous ways. So they'd give them the National Trust a melon, and the melon was stuffed full of pound notes.
Oh wow!
Yeah, they were like these. They were these bright young things from the 1920s who were a little bit like quirky and different.
Yeah, that's
because
cool,
they'd seen such horrible times in World War One. After World War One, there's this massive springback where you end up with these really sort of happy anything goes times in the 20s, and a lot of philanthropic people. And it's a bit like that with World War II, because like after World War II, when that ends, you end up with groups like UNESCO being created, or the European group of human rights, Court of Human Rights, those sort of things, these ideas of bringing us all together and protecting things. Because so much history was destroyed in World War One and World War Two. So many amazing sites were lost forever. When you think about places like Monte Cassino in Italy in World War Two, and so one of the reasons why UNESCO have got so many World Heritage sites in Italy is because of the damage that was done there during World War Two. It's important. Heritage is important.
It is. I want to keep it as it is forever. You know, I don't ever
Yeah.
change it. It's, you know, don't touch it, just because it's amazing. And as you
Yeah.
say, once you've destroyed it, that's it. It's gone. You know, you can't bring it back. So yeah, they
Well,
got
if
to
you think
keep.
about Notre Dame a few years back, that lovely cathedral, and
Yeah,
it was
it'll
just
never be what it was. Yeah,
heartbreaking to see.
yeah.
And yeah, I don't think Stonehenge is gonna burn down. I mean,
No.
I live in terror about a stone falling down. That scares me. It's been so dry there recently. You know, we do.
Yeah,
We do
really.
look at cracks in the ground. Yeah, it's a thing.
Oh wow.
Would worry about it, but
I mean,
I'm not
it's
suggesting a stone is going to fall over. But yeah,
yeah.
it's a worry. We have
It's
to be careful.
obviously very, very strong. It's lasted well.
Well, yeah, the bits that haven't fallen over. So yeah, they got. I think the last time they put a stone back up was
Yeah.
1964.
Okay,
And that
so
was
not
Stonehenge.
that long ago, really.
Not that long ago.
I know it's long ago, but not that long ago.
But no, the kind of ironic thing about that is that from 1963, they put up the last stones of Stonehenge. They completed. There were 5 stones that they decided they were going to write from 59 through to sort of like 60, 62, 63, and they do a really, really good job. But according to reports, they have this massive great crane called a Brabazon crane, because you need a huge great crane to lift these stones. But they borrowed it from the local airfield. It was designed to lift planes, really. And there was some incident where they were moving one of the stones back into position, and they kind of lost control of the crane. And according to the report I read, the operator ended up pushing an iron bar into the chain that was holding the weight to stop it fully dropping the stone. But it swung out. Yeah, it swung out of control, and in doing so, it bashed into this stone. I said earlier, all stones have got a number. Stone 23.
Yeah.
Stone 23 very nearly toppled, but then righted itself and settled.
Oh wow.
That was a close one, lads.
Yeah.
And yeah, and they
Woo!
finished Stonehenge. Yeah, exactly that. It's like no one saw that, did they? And it's before camera phones, so they kind of got away with it. One report.
Nothing to see here. Nothing to see here.
Move on. And yeah, it was that. So this ends up happening.
Yeah.
And but they finished Stonehenge, and there's this massive announcement in all the press: Stonehenge is complete, and the restorations are completed in 1963. But good old weather. So 1963 to 1964, I'm 99% sure I'm right about this, was the second coldest winter on record. Okay, and they end up with a frost that runs at Stonehenge from October through to early March. It was insane. The ground is rock solid. Okay,
Yeah.
loads of snow, loads and loads of snow. Stones look beautiful, but on March the 6th, it suddenly goes the other way. It gets really hot all of a sudden. All of this snow melts, all the ice starts melting, and overnight, Stone 23, off over it goes. I
Oh.
don't know if that, yeah. So that falls over, and they're like, "Oh no, the press is gonna," and you can't hide it now. Everyone's got a Polaroid camera and all that. It happens overnight. Thankfully, there's no one in the stones, because you could have been in the stones back then, up until 78, as we said earlier. But the thing is that this stone, when it lands at a really quirky angle, and it lands at about 35 degrees, right? And like I said, back then, anyone could walk around in the middle of Stonehenge if you had a ticket. You could do it. You could climb on the stones as long as you did. And what kids did was they climbed up this stone, sat on it, and had their picture taken, and then slid down on their bums. And like the stone, right? So the stone fell over, and I wrote again. This is my cliche. This is my catchphrase now. I wrote a paper about this. But when the night the stone fell over was the same day that Summer Holiday was released in the British cinemas.
Okay.
Cliff Richard's thing.
Yeah.
It was the same day that Lee Harvey Oswald bought a rifle from a gun store in America that was attributed to the death of JFK.
Wow.
While that, right. While that stone was on its side, tens of thousands of children slid down it on their bottoms in these 8 months, right? And we end up with Martin Luther King gets assassinated, JFK gets assassinated, and then they put this stone back up, right? Okay. And all these amazing and interesting things are done. The Beatles have just released their first album. All that's happened while that stone's on its side. Really interesting point in history. But when they've put it back up, when the sun catches it on a summer's afternoon, you can still see the fact it's shiny. and it's the only stone at Stonehenge which is shiny. They're all covered in
Wow.
mica and then moss, and it's
Yeah.
only shiny because of the tens of thousands of children's bottoms that polished it.
Oh.
And I love that fact.
So you done a good job there.
Yeah, and I tell school children that all the time.
Yeah.
It's one of my favourite things to say. They're like, "Oh, thanks, mister."
I've got to ask you, because this is Let's Get Freaky. I've got to ask you about the freaky side. Because obviously there is a lot of paranormal stories and speculation that come with the stones. Can you tell us anything about that?
Yeah, I can. I got a bit. So, yeah. Where do I start with this? So, yeah, about 3-4 years ago, a couple of my dear friends and colleagues. So there's two sides to the people who look after the stones. You have the people like myself who are historians during the daytime, massive nerds, and we have the guys who stay there during the night, the guys and girls who are there during the night, the security guards. And they all care about Stonehenge as well. They're passionate about it, but they are there all night. And you hear stories and you get various bits and pieces that you're told. So I was asked by English Heritage to get the segue this slightly, but I was asked by English Heritage about a year ago if I would help them create a TikTok channel thing. They wanted 4 TikToks.
Yeah.
I'd never done TikTok. I'd never downloaded TikTok. I knew nothing of TikTok. So in order to write this, I downloaded TikTok and I watched some TikTok and I thought, well, this is an interesting medium. And I like this. This is quite fun. And for someone like me who's got a few facts running around the head, I could work with it. Anyway, did these TikToks with them. It was fun, did 4 of them. And I appeared in front of the camera. I appeared as the guy who works at Stonehenge. And then after that, that was it. That's all they wanted from me. But I got the bug, right? I really got the bug. So what happened was I started telling stories and facts from the centre of Stonehenge, really. I'd wander around with my phone. I did a couple today. And I tell people stories. And I tell facts, just like I've been telling the story of Wally Hope, all these things. I just waffle them out while I'm walking around Stonehenge. And they ended up being really popular. But one day, I told a story, which I almost started to tell you a minute ago, but I needed to clarify so you got the context. I told the story of Stonehenge and the UFO. So 2 of my very dear friends who have been security guards for a long time and have worked, and both no longer work there, sadly. One day I turned up and you take over control of the stones from security. And there's a sort of signing over procedure. Did anything happen over the night? You know, anyone damage the stones? Anyone in? Yeah. And that, quite often people do try and come in. So, and they were white as sheets. And I'm not joking. They were like, and I couldn't really get out what was going on with them. But later on, they sort of messaged me and said, look, you won't believe what happened. And I just couldn't get out of them. But like, we saw the weirdest thing. I videoed it. Blah, blah, blah. So it took me about 3 or 4 days. And then eventually they were like, look, Matt, we'd really like you to look at this. Oh, I should add that one of the security guards from that moment went off sick with stress. He was so freaked out about what he saw.
Wow.
Okay. Right. And I say, I'm not lovely guys, both of them. Right. Completely freaked out. Didn't know what he's seen. And I was like, can I just see what you're on about? And that by this time they sort of gone through a bit of journey. So look, Matt, you know the stones, and I've got a little bit of respect from people in the sort of heritage industry, and say, look at this. Can you say that this, would you put your name to this and say this is recorded at Stonehenge? I was like, well, yeah, well, yeah, what is it? Show me, please. And the thing is, there's 2 guys at 2 different points at Stonehenge, one with an Android phone and one with an iPhone. And it's 5 o'clock in the morning, literally this time of year, where if you're up at 5 o'clock at the moment, it's daylight, it's bright, you can see what's going on. And they're still at Stonehenge, and the first one picks up something in the distance, and he's freaked out enough to turn on his iPhone, right, and start recording. And it's so interesting to hear their conversation, because I've listened to it quite possibly 100 times, if not more. And so one of the guards starts with his iPhone, definitely the better film of the 2, and he's going, I don't know what it is. What? Can you see that? Can you see that? And it starts off, it's just this, and I will send you this footage. You can look at it, it's on my YouTube
Oh,
channel.
thank you. Yeah,
Okay,
thank you
please.
very much.
I'll tell this is a big, long story about this. But yeah. And it looks like it basically looks a bit like a weather balloon or something, and it's floating. But the key fact is it's coming from the military research area of Salisbury Plain, right?
Interesting.
Very, very, very early in the morning. So yeah. And just as it gets a bit closer, I can hear the other security guard over the other side, who I again know very well. And he's going, I don't know what the F it is. What do you? And they're getting more and more sweary. And then he turns on his phone. And the great thing is, I've got these 2 recordings, and you can hear them talking back to each other. So it sort of authenticates itself in many ways. And as they're looking at this weather balloon, or whatever it is, it completely and dramatically changes shape and the plane of angle. It turns on its side, and then these very shiny triangles stick out of it. I'm not joking. You have to see
Wow.
and then it turns and it travels in a slightly different direction, and then it turns in on itself again, and these shiny triangles turn in a different direction. And by this time, the security guards are losing it. Now, no word of a lie. They're proper like, what's going on? And guard number 2, who's the second one, starts filming. He's shaking so much now he can't film properly. And I've slowed the footage down. You get snippets of it from his footage. But guard number 1, he's got his iPhone. He's trained dead on it. He's keeping calm as you can. And he captures. And in the end, we got about 2.5 minutes of footage of this bizarre thing that changes shape. I don't want you to think it's like some completely continuous morphing thing. What happens is it looks like it's moving in almost like a balloon shape, and then it looks like a drone. It looks like some sort of controlled drone. Then it changes direction. Then it's very cylindrical. Anyway, right. So that's what happened. Saw this. The guys told me about it. Eventually, they gave me copies of the videos, right? And I begged and I pleaded, and I was like, look, we've got to send these guys, we've got to send these to someone. This is so cool. We've got to send it to ancient aliens, anything. I don't know what we're going to do. And we're talking about it. But both of them didn't want to release it. They were like, well, no, not unless someone who can do it justice is going to come in for it. And because it's a really difficult thing. And people came in, but they were fairly disingenuous. And at the same time, I'm a historian with quite a historian with quite a reasonable reputation, and I was like, oh, so they were, yeah. So after about 6-7 months of this back and forth between us, it starts falling into the background. I'd watched it endless times. I started showing the footage at the end of some of my talks I did to people. If I thought, what do you think it is, people? And don't turn on your phones. Don't tell anyone. And it was like, but the thing was that I was told, do not release this footage. Yeah, no, this is, guys, we don't want to release this. But maybe one day we can release it. Maybe one day. And it was and I kind of, COVID comes to an end and all this sort of stuff. And I haven't forgotten about it. It's always at the back of my mind.
Yeah.
But I've got to the stage now. So back to almost present time again. I got to the stage with my sort of TikTok, YouTube channel-y stuff, where I'd maybe become a little bit too comfortable telling stories. I'd had a couple of stories I told, and they'd hit like 600,000 views, and I was getting a bit of a big head, and I'm thinking, right, I'm going viral here. This is it, and all that. So I told the story that I told you of the UFO at Stonehenge, because I'd spoken to both the guards there at that day, and I was like, come on, can I just tell the story? And they're like, what? You can tell the story, but you can't have the footage, man. You can't have the footage. Yeah, I've got the footage, but you can't release the footage.
Yeah.
I was like, all right, okay, all right. And it just happened to be the most misty and mysterious looking day at Stonehenge you can imagine. You can look at the video on YouTube if you want, but it just looks a really moody day at Stonehenge. And I was wandering around, and I never show my face on my TikTok channel. I always just show the stones, and it's just my voice. And I wander around, and I started saying, I'm going to tell you a story. I'm going to tell you my story about a UFO at Stonehenge. And this is that story. And I told it. And it went a bit crazy, and I didn't realize it had gone crazy until I was at work 2 days later, and somebody had sent me an article from the Daily Mirror, and then there was an article, and then there was an article from the Daily Mail, and then there was an article from like America, and then I was like, oh shoot, I'm in trouble here. And it had gone, even though I'd only had like 400,000 views or something, but
That's
beyond
awesome.
TikTok, somebody had taken it off and gone, and there was
Yeah.
these big long wordy articles talking about me and my,
Wow.
yeah, it is because I'm anonymous on TikTok. Nobody knew. A man who purports to work at Stonehenge has told a story of a mysterious occurrence, and it happened to be at exactly the same time as those balloons are getting shot down over China. They're going like, oh, we've got these balloons coming
Okay.
from China. So
Yeah.
I've kind of accidentally caught the zeitgeist.
Yeah.
And I got in so much trouble. I got told, "That's it."
Oh,
no more
really?
of that. Yeah, yeah.
Oh, man.
I had to negotiate, and it was really,
Oh, wow.
really scary. But yeah, so there was all these people turning up at Stonehenge or contacting them saying, "Who is Neolithic One? Who is this?" Because that's my name on YouTube, and
Yeah.
I'm
Yeah.
Neolithic One. And but
Man, that's
yeah,
awesome.
so yeah, it went. Yeah, so you got to be a bit careful with these things. But I
Yeah.
promise you, and like I say, I'll happily share the footage with you. But
Yeah, I'd love to see that. And I'll put
it's
links in the
really,
show description as
yeah,
well.
yeah. I'm quite happy to do that. It's just that's probably the way, and the way that people reacted to that story.
Yeah.
It was quite surprising. I was taken away by that. I've seen lots. There's a story it sounds like a flippant story. I've actually used it many times when I've done talks and stuff, and I've always used it like a jokey story, but it's absolutely true. There was my first ever first aid incident at Stonehenge, which sounds a very odd thing to say, but I was at the Stones at point 8, and I had a radio message that a lady needed help, and I sort of channeled my inner Baywatch and grabbed a first aid kit and ran to her aid and all that sort of stuff. And I got there, and this lady sort of similar to me, and she was crouched down in a ball on the path near Stonehenge. And I said, "Okay, can I help? And she's like, I can't move. I don't know what's going on. I can't move." I was like, "Okay, all right." So, my name's Matt. Can I help? Put a blanket around her, and I sat with her. And I said, "Well, so what happened? What happened?" And she said, "Well, I was walking towards Stonehenge, and there was this brilliant flash of light, and I got pulled to the ground by a really powerful bubble of energy. I can't describe it." I was like, "Oh, okay." And she was tense. She was tight. She was holding it. And I was like, okay. All right. Well, and I sat with her for quite at least half an hour. I sat with her and I was talking to her and we're getting to know each other. And this is the bit where I sound flippant, but I'm not. This is Stonehenge first aid for you. Okay. This is you have to do things a bit different now. All right. So I said to this lady, I said, "Look, what you'll probably find in the next few minutes is that the polarity will change at Stonehenge. There'll be a shift. You'll suddenly feel a release. And if you don't go when you feel that release, you're going to be stuck here for another half hour till it happens again." And she sort of looked at me and said, okay. And again, not being flippant. 3 minutes later, she stood up and she thanked me and we hugged, and off she went.
Oh,
So
wow.
it's like you get these interactions with people and these things that happen there, which are sometimes really hard to explain, and sometimes you end up being somewhere between it sounds odd, but like a tour guide, a security guard, and maybe a priest. I don't know. You're trying to like
Bit of
let me help
everything.
you. Let me help you, my child. You okay? And there's a lot of that sort of stuff. It's so frequent an occurrence to find cremated remains scattered at Stonehenge, or someone who last time I was here with my wife and she's now gone, or my husband, or that it's still now.
Yeah.
It's a pile of stones in a field to some people. It's a temple to others, and it's the most sacred place on earth to some. And it's right back to what we were saying before. It's just a strange, crazy place.
It's an amazing place. That's how I talk to people all over the world, and they all say Stonehenge, like, what a place. They've either visited it or they want to visit it. It's just a special place.
Yeah, it's a real honor to be involved in that story. It's a funny thing. And I think if I did ever get tired of it, that's maybe a sign that I needed to move on to new pastures. But It ain't happened yet.
Not yet. Nah.
And this weekend, this is all about solstice. It's all about that height, that build. So, you know, there's kilometers worth of ropes and stakes that come down. There's going to be everything from toilet blocks and security stations
Yeah.
and pizzerias and stuff are just going to pop up overnight.
Yeah.
And for one night and one night only, Stonehenge is going to be the center of the universe for everybody as the sun rises in this country. You know, people,
That's
it's
so
the strangest
cool, man.
thing.
Yeah.
It's the strangest thing because, you know, it's a historical monument that we look after and people come visit, like I said, like this ribbon of humanity. But that one day a year or 2 days a year, you're like, wow.
I've got to try and get down at that point at some
You'd be
point.
so welcome anytime you want to come down.
Yeah.
You're not far away. You'll be.
No, I'm not far at all.
Happy to show you around.
Thank you very much, man. So I know I should know this, but what is the actual date of the solstice? Is that started now?
Yeah, so summer solstice is on the 21st this year. So it's the 20th through to the 21st. So basically, it can wobble about a bit. So it doesn't. It's not always going to be on the 20th. So we have the 21st of June. You have the 21st of December. They're your solstices, and they literally derive from the Latin of sun stand still. So for 3 days in a row, the sun will be basically on the same point of the horizon as it sets. And then it'll start moving back in the opposite direction. And that tipping happens every 6 months, and that's what's reflected at the stones. So normally what happens at a solstice on the it'll be the night of the 20th through to the morning of the 21st. It can wobble about a bit. So we're basically some people say longest day, some people say shortest night. I mean, for me, I celebrate the shortest night. I love the idea of the sun setting on the shortest night, and there's such a wonderful vibe around the stones. I mean, it's great watching the sunrise. I highly recommend it, but one thing that not many people do realize is watching the sunset's just as cool, if not better.
Yeah.
Because everybody is charged and happy, and they're looking forward to this night, whatever may happen. And maybe and in the morning, people are they're still charged and happy, but they're a bit more tired, and you know what I mean. It's been an experience, and there's the stones, or they say talk about the energy of the stones, but it impacts on people, and it can tire you out. It's a funny thing.
It's awesome, man.
Yeah, but we need to get you in the center of the stones.
That's
what you need. We need to get you back to the younger Tommy when you were in the middle, touching them stones.
I need to get back in there. This is
Recharge
the freaky
those
thing
chakras
as well. Yeah. The freaky thing is I recently spoke to my mum about this, right? And she was obviously there when she doesn't remember us actually going up to touch the stones, but I do. And I've got that memory in my mind. So I'm like, what's going on there then? That's the freaky part.
Well, there's so many freaky things that happen around the stones. It's just, it kind of, I don't know if you ever had a go at dowsing. Have you ever done that? You know, when you get the sort of, some people use.
Oh yeah, I do know what you mean. Yeah, of course.
You know, for dowsing for water and all that.
Yeah.
Like almost every day, I will see somebody dowsing for energy at Stonehenge.
Really?
Yeah, and you're like, and it's funny because again, like I've worked there an awfully long time now, but they seem to find it in the same places. I have noticed that.
So there is something there, man.
There's certain points around the stones where people, and you meet people who. It's so strange because you meet people who really want to be sensitive to all these earth energies, and they exude everything that you'd imagine, from the clothing to the style of the talk to everything. And then every now and then you meet someone who categorically, without any doubt, is exuding that earth energy, and they might not. They very rarely fit the stereotype of the person that you think might. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
So like that person I met today from who gave me these crystals.
Yeah,
that was such a powerful experience. I don't know if I'm going to get another one like that for a little while. I'm looking up to my office wall just here, and there's another picture of. There was a film called, I think, Seventh Generation, which did really well at Cannes Film Festival, but it was all about the Native American, the treatment of Native Americans in America. And the head of their tribe came to Stonehenge. This huge, great, powering chap, and literally a tribe shaman. And he was dressed in a leather jacket and just looked like a normal guy, but he had an unbelievable presence about him.
Yeah.
just resonated through me, and I immediately went home and I bought his documentary, and I've literally got a picture of him on my wall.
That's awesome.
And you meet some people who just, they kind of change you.
Yeah.
And it's an honor to be able to meet those people. Sometimes, I mean, I had another ridiculous one like 2 years ago, where I was literally in the office having a cup of tea at this, very close to Stonehenge. We got a little office where we have our, cups of tea and coffee and all, and sandwiches. And I'd just come off a break, and like, Matt, would you mind coming and helping? We got a chap up here. He says he's from NASA. I was like, yeah, all right, okay. Well, he wants a tour. Is that all right? And I was like, yeah, cool. He's from NASA. That sounds fun.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I go up and I meet this guy, and he's in his 80s. He's I think he was 86. Tall guy, and he's got a security detail. And he shakes my hand and he goes, "Hi, I'm Charlie Duke." And I'm like, "Hi, nice to meet you. Nice to meet you." And I gave him this tour around Stonehenge, and talked about scientific, and we really hit it off. It's like sometimes you meet someone, you're like, "Oh God, I like the guy. I love this guy. He's amazing."
Yeah.
And it turns out he's like, so I was talking about the moon and the relation to Stonehenge and the moon. He goes, "I walked on the moon, you know." And I was like, "Sorry?" And he's go, "I'm the youngest man ever to walk on the moon." And I said, "Sorry, you're what? Sorry?" And he said, "Yeah, I'm Charlie Duke. I'm General Charlie Duke. And he was the Capcom.
Wow.
He was Capcom for Apollo 11. So he's the guy who literally is there. So he's talking to them as they land on the moon.
Wow.
He was meant to be on Apollo 13, but he caught chicken pox.
Wow.
So they let him go up in Apollo 16. And yes, he's the youngest man ever to walk on the moon. And
Wow.
I spent 2.5 hours with him, just talking with him before he even sort of like really told me that.
That's
oh
cool,
my God,
man.
that's incredible.
By the way, I walked on the moon.
yeah, just literally. He's
Wow.
like, "No, I'm the youngest man ever to walk on the moon, and I still am." And he's 86, and he's still the
That's
youngest
cool,
man ever to walk on the moon. And
It's incredible.
and the weirdest thing is, like 6 years before that, I met Buzz Aldrin at Stonehenge, and I gave him a tour.
Wow.
So it's like,
Yeah.
it's the nuttiest place. So I've had the privilege. There's only 4 people on planet Earth who are still alive who have walked on the moon, and I've given 50% of them a tour around.
Yeah, that's pretty impressive, man.
I mean, I don't mean to name drop, but it's just the nuttiest thing. It's like,
that's cool.
it's such an honor.
I would name drop that for sure.
Because they just turn up. They just, we get ridiculous. It doesn't happen so much as it used to, but
it's got to be, easily one of the top 5 most amazing places in the world. It's got to be. It's got to be. I don't know the actual list.
It's certainly one of the most powerful humanity magnets we got. I'd say that much.
100%.
It's got that pull, and it doesn't matter who you are.
Yeah,
you're intrigued. I mean, I was again about 7-8 years ago. We had a presidential visit. We had literally, I turned up to work, and they're like, "So what's going on? Why is my phone hissing?" And why are all these people walking around with earpieces that I've never seen before? And well, I can't tell you that. It's just we got to. They literally told us Angela Merkel was coming to Stonehenge.
Okay.
We think Angela Merkel's coming to. I was like, "Oh, that's really interesting. The German Chancellor. Oh, that'd be fun."
Yeah.
And it's not until you see like Air Force One landing in the field next to Stonehenge, and you're like, "Oh, it's President Obama's coming to see Stonehenge." It's just,
wow, man.
It's the straight.
Yeah.
In that way, it's unique in heritage sites in the UK. You don't get many other sites where
everyone wants to see it. Yeah.
You might. It could be anyone from Joe Bloggs next door or Floyd Mayweather could just turn up, but a lot of the time you don't know who they are, and it's quite funny. So you end up talking with someone. I had a really good long chat with this chap, and I had no idea who he was. And then afterwards, somebody said, "Do you know who that was?" And I was like, "No." I was like, "That's PewDiePie." And I was like, "Who's PewDiePie?" It's a YouTuber, is he? I have no idea.
Massive.
You find out he's one of the richest people on earth.
Yeah.
Like, I had no idea. I was away for him for half an hour. I had absolutely no idea. I would have taken that.
That's cool, man.
It is kind of odd. And Glastonbury starts next week, so we're getting quite excited. So we know for sure there's going to be some bands coming through.
Oh,
my wife's a
awesome,
massive Foo Fighters fan, and if the Foo Fighters turned up, I'd have to lose all professionalism there.
Get them down there, man. I'm sure they would love to go down there. It's awesome stuff. I've got to ask you, because I think we're coming to 2 hours. I don't want to keep you all night, but I've got to ask you, have you had any paranormal experiences yourself?
Oh, okay. So yes, I have.
Can we have? Have we got time?
I can do it quickly. Right.
Yeah,
Okay.
come on,
Away
man.
from Stonehenge. All right.
Thank
So
you.
I do guided. I have done for many years. I've done guided tours around Salisbury, my home city, with my wonderful friends Frog Moody and Ruby Vittorino. We do this thing. We've done it for many, many years now. And what we used to do is take people for Halloween walks. And there's a famous pub in Salisbury called the Haunch of Venison. It's a 700-year-old pub, famous for the fact it's got a dismembered human hand behind the bar.
Wow.
Haunted to high heaven. It's well known for that. But when we did these ghost tours or these Halloween walks, we would always play a character, and my character was the skeptic. Okay, so I've always come at this from a very skeptical point of view, and that was my job in the gig. And we build up this atmosphere. So we did quite well. And one year we got asked if we would hold a conference for the Ghost Club of Great Britain. Well, it's one of the oldest ghost clubs in the country. And we had these delegates from all over the world. No exaggeration. 32 delegates, America, all over. And they converged on Salisbury. And my colleagues and I, we wrote lectures and we did these things for them. But the big main event was a meal at the Haunch of Venison on the Saturday night, where we take them for a ghost walk around Salisbury, and we have this 3-course meal, and then we tell them some of the chilling tales from the haunch, right? And as part of this, because I do magic and stuff like that, I was going to have my hand chopped off. Okay, we had prosthetic blood, a barber surgeon kit, because it was all part of the story. And I very dramatically, I'm going to have my hand chopped off, and members of the audience are going to have. And I've done it before. We've done it many times. Anyway, so I'm backstage and I'm waiting for my cue. And my wonderful colleague Ruby is telling the story about an infamous murder that happened in the haunch. And she got to the point where she said, and it happened on this night. And as she said that, all of the windows behind her, these massive, great 15th century windows, burst open. And
Wow.
Everybody, honestly, it was amazing, right? And everybody, without exception, apart from us, because we were freaked out, started spontaneously clapping and whooping and like,
oh, well, they thought it was part of the show.
like it was that best effect ever. Then the lights started flickering and going all weird, and then they started looking up at the lights because they're all sensitive, as they put it, and all that sort of stuff. And they're picking out, oh, something's going on here. So we closed all the windows and we carried on with the show. And after the gig finished, and the people had gone home, and we spoke to the landlord, and he's explained to us that those windows hadn't opened in 40 years, and they'd been painted shut, and they had no idea how they'd opened. All right, and the Haunch of Venison had been a place that, I mean, my colleague Ruby, she's written a brilliant book about this pub. It's been published quite recently. I highly recommend it. She's written the A to Z of the Haunch of Venison. It's on Hotback Press. Highly recommend it.
Awesome.
It's a really, really good book. And she talks about some of our experiences there, because what we always used to do when we did these guided walks, and we've done them for, again, about 9-10 years, every time we would finish with a pint at the Haunch of Venison. So it's this amazing pub. And the thing that happened on more than 3 occasions, and this isn't a book, is that our pint glasses would fly across the room. So there's certain tables in the Haunch of Venison that we started to avoid. So what would happen would my colleague Frog would put his pint of cider down, I'd put my pint down, and I'd be sipping mine, and his glass would start gliding across, and you think, okay, well, maybe the table's damp and that sort of thing. So no, the table's not damp. Put it on a placemat, and it still starts sliding. So we would hold his glass and stop it happening.
Wow.
And it got to the point where Frog's glass, well, certainly on one occasion, his glass and my glass went almost as soon as we sort of drink, put it down, and they were gathering ferocity across the table, because we were basically going around Salisbury telling stories. And I still do. I'm a historian, so I tell true stories. I tell facts, not fiction.
Yeah.
But I'm a storyteller, so I give it a bit of, and build a certain atmosphere. And it was almost like they were pushing us out or something like that.
Wow,
but Frog's one night at the pub, Frog's glass got smashed, and he went up to the bar lady and he said, "Look, it's happened again." And she said, "It's happened 6 times tonight."
Wow.
So the haunch.
It's
in Venice and
amazing,
Salisbury.
man.
When you come down and see me, which I hope you do, Tommy,
We've got to have a pint in there,
we're
sir.
going for the haunch of venison, and it's the most. I mean, like I say, I've always in these things. I've actually people have paid for me to go on ghost hunts and stuff like that because I've got this. You're a bit skeptical and all that sort of stuff. So I'd love to see what you thought. And nothing has ever happened, and I've all been like, this is all a bit of a heavy, and I don't. But through my work with Time Zone and at the haunch of venison and around that, I have seen things that have undoubtedly changed my mind about. There's funny things that happen in this world.
Yeah, man.
But I tell you one very, very weird story, right? So on that night, coming back from there, I do the whole thing. I wear the top hat. I've got a big long frock coat and I carry a long stick. And I was walking back from that particular night and there was this lad in front of me. And you know how as you walk along and the streetlights, they sort of illuminate you in a certain way. And he suddenly caught my shadow as I was walking behind him. And he turned around and he swing at me. Went, "What are you?" And I was like, no, it's just working, mate. He's like, "Oh, so I thought you were a ghost." And it was like the weirdest thing. He proper lost it. I was like,
Oh, man.
I'm just working. And he's like, "I thought you were a Victorian ghost, mate. Sorry."
He thought you was Jack the Ripper.
Yeah, he thought I was. I thought it's the weirdest thing.
Wow,
So,
man.
You got to be careful.
Oh,
wearing a
that's
top
cool. Yeah, it's dangerous. Oh, man.
hat.
Oh, thank you so much, Matt. This has been absolutely awesome talking to you. I've learned so much tonight, and thank you so much, sir.
That's my honour. I'm so happy to be on. Thank you, Tommy.
I really appreciate. Can you tell the audience where they can find you and your TikTok?
Yeah, happily. Okay, so I'm called Neolithic One on TikTok if you do TikTok, and I'm also called Neolithic One on YouTube. But the one isn't one as in the numeral. It's not one as in it's literally WAN, Neolithic One. Okay, and yeah, there's loads of stuff on there. And the tours I do with Frog and Ruby are on Time Zone tours, Time Zone Productions, and we have a website. You can look that up. And there's loads of stuff on there. And yeah, please let us know. And also to anyone listening, have a great solstice because I'll be at Stonehenge and I will be forevermore, hopefully. Well,
yes,
my time.
Awesome,
Thank you,
sir.
Tommy.
I look forward to coming and having a pint with you and seeing the Stones again, which I always love to do. Thank you so much, sir. It's been an absolute honour having you on the show.
Thank you, Tommy. It's been great fun. I really enjoyed that, mate. Thank you.
Just going to stop recording.